when we choose to work on our creativity and on the things like the fear that sits beneath our creative blocks, etc., we're not only getting better at our creativity, but actually we're getting better at ourselves. We're becoming who we're meant to be.
What if story is the answer to our crises of meaning and belonging, to our impulse to heal our lives and help others, to our desire and drive to leave this world better than we found it? Now, we love good stories. In fact, we're kind of obsessed, not just with the stories themselves, but with the stories behind the stories. Their oddly perfect timing, the healing process they provoke in their authors, and their capacity to catalyze individual and collective change. And we love exploring these with writers, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, healers, parents, and others. Tune in to hear these stories behind the stories and entertain with us the real possibility that whether you are a teller or a consumer, story is always offering or leading us to an answer. How in the world does this man do all of this? That was our big question. And of course, we got the story behind the story. When his worldview full of absolutes shattered, Joel reached for his pen and his journal, and he began the journey of restoring his life with creativity, and was eventually compelled to stages and pages where he now transforms lives with his transcendent words. Tune in to listen to this award-winning writer, keynote speaker, creativity specialist, educator, artist, and Australia's most successful internationally touring performance poet share how creativity transformed from a natural propensity to a new pathway to transcendent connection and purpose. You'll hear him talk about the narratives he sees stopping others from unleashing their creativity and how to rewrite them. You'll also hear his best tips for packaging, marketing, and getting art into the world. Get ready. No, really, I mean it. Pause and go get ready. Get yourself a cup of something super warm and delicious so that you can sip on that while you sip on the power of transcendent creativity and maybe begin to restore your life. All right. Welcome to Sips of Story and Sanity, where we talk about the stories behind the stories with authors, speakers, thought leaders, healers, parents, and more. A few of my partners here at Save by Story, my son, Aaron.
Hello.
And my clients turned friends, turned partners, Teddy.
Hi, y'all.
And Lori.
Hi there.
And Carlin.
Hello.
Are here to help me make sure we get the most delicious sips of story and sanity out of this experience. And I'm betting that Alyssa is going to slide on here at some point too. So we'll say hi to her when she hops on. So today is really exciting. We have an amazing guest. Joel McKerrow is an award-winning writer, keynote speaker, creativity specialist, educator, artist, and having performed for hundreds of thousands of people throughout the world, is one of Australia's most successful internationally touring performance poets. Full-time in his creative career for the past 15 years, Joel's currently the director of the School for Creative Development and works extensively with leaders, teams, entrepreneurs, and creatives to help them navigate their way forward. He is the artist ambassador for the aid and development organization Tear Fund Australia, is on teaching staff at the Melbourne Young Writers Studio, is the co-founder and host of The Deep Place on Creativity and Spirituality podcast, and is a speaker with Booked Out Speaker Agency. Joel is also very passionate about creative education, and over the last 15 years has taught poetry and the creative process to over 70,000 students in colleges and schools all over the world. So you don't sleep. Is that?
It's too much. It makes me that makes me tired hearing all of that.
I was like, how much of this should I pull off and say? But I I decided to go with the more, and it's not even the whole thing because, I think that it's really important to show just how much you're doing. Like, that's one of the things, like I said, Alyssa's not here yet, but one of the things that I hear from her all the time, because she's in one of your programs, is like, oh my gosh, the amount of things this man is doing at once, which is hilarious for her to say about anybody because she, of all people, is one of these, right? That's what we say about her. So to hear her
Yeah.
say that about someone else is like next level. So I want to hear about how this got started, but because we talk about the stories behind the stories, but I kind of want, as I was thinking about like, what do I want to ask today? I kind of wanted to see little Joel, like at the beginning, like a little character sketch of little Joel, the young child. What was he like?
Little Joel, the young child, yeah, was a dabbling in creativity, kind of very focused on pleasing people, and being a good compliant little kid, but also liking to have little spurts of rebellion. But probably, I mean, in terms of my story, I reckon it really kicks off kind of around the end of primary school. Do you call it primary school in America?
Mhm.
Yeah, junior school, primary something. It kind of kicks off at the end there, where this kind of budding creativity that was beginning to happen for me, and would have kind of very quickly led into that. I was beginning to do kind of theatre and writing and loving that side of life, and then had one of those experiences that just totally, of a teacher, me making some cheeky comment in class and a teacher pointing out that my face went red, which my face goes red all the time. It's just kind of the genetic reality of my life that I've had to come to grips with and own and be okay with. But at that point, when you're in like that age, and then everyone else in the class starts pointing at you saying, your face is going red, your face is going red. And that kind of, it was just one of those moments, those moments that you kind of grab a hold of and shapes everything else. It was one of those moments, and it shut me down. And so my creativity then really got shut down. And in fact, I didn't like perform kind of theater or character dialogue wise until, I'm talking like 5 years ago, was the first time that I had the courage again to actually do character-based dialogue acting. Obviously I've been performing for years and years and years, but even that took till kind of end of high school before I wasn't petrified of getting out the front of people again. So I was let's call me a repressed creative is little Joel, and trying to fit in with the world until I realized, I think, that this part of me that I'd squashed down was actually the heart of me, was actually like the weird stuff was the thing that made me who I was. The stuff that I thought kind of, I don't know, made me on the outer from everyone else was actually what was the thing that I should, and then began to shape my whole life around. So repressed creative. Cheers to any other repressed creatives in the room.
I think we all have one of those stories. So how old were you when that unlocked for you, when you realized that all of those weird, I think you use the term weird parts, were actually what made you you?
How, when they started to really come out?
Yeah, when you saw that and started to lean in.
Yeah, so they probably at different stages they began to come out for me. So I remember a friend, when I was in senior high school, a friend invited me to speak at their youth group. I grew up in churchy world, and I was still petrified of speaking in front of people, but I got up and I did so. I went to the youth group and spoke, and there was just this, and it was a real turning point, because there was this one kid at the back who came up and said, it was like you were talking to me, kind of thing. I've never heard anyone who has the same kind of story and the stuff you were saying, and I just don't feel so alone anymore. And that moment for me was like a something that changed everything. It was like, this actually, because I'd always, even when I was pushing all the creative stuff down, I still felt like I was going to be speaking in front of people and kind of leading people. That was always still in me. And I thought at that point, because of the kind of churchy world I grew up in, I thought I was going to be a mega church pastor and and would preach to stadiums of people. That was the weird kind of thing. So then that began to unlock things for me. And then a trip overseas, really a little while later after high school, is what totally it did lots of things for me. I actually write about it in one of my books that I know you have read, Woven, about my life story of this life kind of shattering moment of being overseas in the border of Thailand and Burma, and going to do some work at an orphanage there, and kind of arriving at the same time as this mother came with her sick baby boy on her back, and the baby boy had just actually died, and I had to dig a grave for this baby boy, and it shattered my life, completely shattered kind of my faith and my world and my beliefs and everything, that moment. But also, I remember sitting in kind of a bamboo hut that night and feeling my whole world torn apart, and I started to write, and it came out as poetry, and that really is where that trip is where my creativity really began to come out, as this kind of therapeutic, cathartic way for me to explore the anger, the meltdown of my life, which is really fascinating. That kind of the shattering of my life also led to, as probably for a lot of us it does, though it doesn't feel like at the time, the shattering of my life led to what has become the next however many years of my life, 20 years of my life of creativity.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder about that with the because I read, we all met at the story conference where Joel performed, and we all took a minute to pull our jaws up off the ground, and then some of us had to work hard to find the courage to go up and say hi afterwards, because he just blew the top off the room. It was amazing. And so then I saw the book, and it was funny because I saw what you were doing on stage, but there were not any like undertones of faith as part of what you were doing at that particular conference. Maybe in the workshop that I didn't get to, but I didn't. It surprised me to see Woven, and then see the subtitle about what's the subtitle on that again?
Faith for the dissatisfied.
Right. And so I have someone in my life who has been on that journey for a long time, hasn't quite pulled themselves out. And I felt that way, when I was, I think, probably around the same age as your life-shattering moment. Like, man, all of this stuff that I grew up believing, like, this is not working out in my adult world.
Yeah.
This is not, things are not matching up. Explanations don't work. And so I loved that. So it was just interesting to see you on stage, and then to see the journey of faith. And I wondered about whether they traveled together for the spirituality and the creativity, or if that was something that happened as a result of the rupture.
Yeah, no, they really did travel together, even in the sense of because kind of that world, that kind of conservative evangelical Christianity that I grew up in, because it was breaking and cracking and crumbling. Wonderful, Alyssa has joined us. Yay.
Hey, great to see you guys.
Hi.
You made it.
I'm here.
You're
Surviving
here.
time zones.
What did you say? Surviving what?
The time zones.
Yes. What time is it in Italy?
I'm actually in Greece now, and it is 0018. Yeah, we're getting there. It's okay. What did I miss? What did I jump in and
Right.
you guys
I'm
talking
just
about?
talking about the crumbling of faith and belief and life and everything.
Okay, so light stuff, nothing heavy to start with. Awesome.
um yeah, so my creativity did travel alongside and journey with, sorry, the kind of crumbling of my life and faith and ideals and worldview, especially in the sense what I was saying was that world of absolutes and black and white. When that falls, when it is like, the world doesn't look like this, like I thought, like I'd grown up believing. For me, the thing that creativity does is it so beautifully articulates what you can't articulate and speaks to what can't be spoken. And I didn't have the words. I didn't, like, all the words for me had left of in terms of my absolute understandings of life and God and relationships, etc. The words had left, like the black and white words, and I needed new words. And I think that's why creativity became such a massive thing for me. It became my way of praying, and it still is. Like, barely do I ever turned to God as I used to and say, "Dear God," or "Dear Heavenly Father," as I was taught growing up. Like, I write poetry, and that poetry is this explosion of my heart, and that more than anything is prayer, surely, and is us connecting to God. And so I think definitely all throughout my journey, and the journey as well of kind of, like, we often talk about kind of faith deconstruction when everything falls apart, and then kind of reconstructing, trying to work out, okay, well, who am I in the midst of this, and working out what to hold on to and what to get rid of, etc. And I think in that process as well, creativity is incredibly important to rebuild one's life around, and to re-story the bogus stories that were told for a long time about ourselves and the world and God, etc. Creativity gave me the tools, I think, to re-story my life. Yeah.
I'm curious. It makes me want to know, when you're talking about those, like those creative, the explosions and I'm thinking, man, I really wish that I had developed that before my world shattered. Because the way that I reconstructed mine was, I got Aaron, and then I was like, oh, I really have to figure this out. Like, this kid is asking me, where's our Bible? Why don't we pray like the rest of our family? Like, I had to have answers, right? So he
Yeah.
kind of forced my hand with that. But one of the things that I remember when all of that fell apart was the watching other people like lose everything. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as if they had missed out on something really important in the early days. So for me, it was like, well, what if that isn't true? And my answer was always, but I have seen some things that are inexplicable without
Mm-hmm.
supernatural intervention,
Mm-hmm.
without me participating in that experience of laying on hands and watching someone get up and walk. Like, I've seen some things. So when you were talking about the words, I was thinking that's literally what I used to tell people. Like, I'm fine with using different words, but there are some essentials here I'm not willing to give up just because my experience won't allow it. So what were some of those for you? When did you have, like, as a kid or as a young adult, transcendent moments that, I think about, like, my moments in Mexicali as a high school student on missions trips under the stars, listening, worshiping, like that I can experience in different places through creativity. But like, that's the thing for me that kind of, like, I'm always is my, I don't want to say my North Star, but it's like the resonant point. Like, oh, that's what that was. That's So did you have those? I mean, you're talking about like, I'm going to grow up and lead a mega church. So you had to have had some big
I
experience.
did. I definitely did. I had like lots of those experiences, and which is probably similar. The reason why I at that point didn't just kind of throw everything out and say, well, stuff any kind of belief, faith, spirituality, etc. Because I had had quite intense transcendent experiences of God, the divine, of and what I'd recognize now is definitely those experiences were this mixture of stuff that would have been God, the divine, and also my humanness coming into everything. But like I remember one of the earliest ones, and this may make me sound like a freak, and that's okay, depending on what tradition you grew up in. If you did grow up in a faith tradition, but I had kind of been discovering the idea of prayer and worship when I was really young, and as in like 12 or 13 or whatever. And I remember this moment where I was like praying and listening to worship music at that age, and I was in my room and I was alone, and I'd grown up in a very conservative evangelical church, as I said, which had no kind of nothing to do with kind of more the Pentecostal nature of Christianity, of that kind of tradition. And so I was there in my room one day, and it was like my room was filled with this presence that I couldn't describe, this overwhelming sense, this bright filled light, to the point where I was there and I was standing in my room, and suddenly I was knocked off my feet and I was on the ground speaking a different language, this other language coming out of my mouth, which for Pentecostal traditions people would say is speaking in tongues. For me, I'd never heard, like, I'd heard of speaking in tongues, but that was not something, I didn't know what it was. And so had this it was probably one of my first real full-on moments of connecting with something that totally overwhelmed the individual that I was, and made me realize that there definitely is this thing beyond myself, this person, this being, this. And so like that, those kind of moments, then I have had a lot of them over the years, and I have had a lot of them during those years of high school, and then I've had a lot of them in the midst of kind of the deconstruction of my faith and life and reconstruction, and all through my life, I think I have these moments. But yeah, a lot of them then kind of have become the creative moments, even in the sense of like when I was in high school and within that world, I'd always be, because I was like the leader and passionate about, I don't know, leading people. I mean, they used to call me Holy Joel McKerrow was my nickname growing up. That's the kind of person I was. And I would be the person who'd be out when I kind of discovered this Pentecostal world, the Holy Spirit and all that kind of stuff as this teenager. I'd be the person out the front of prayer things, kind of putting my hands on people and prophesying over them and having visions for them and that kind of stuff. And then when all of that shattered and went away, what I realized really quickly was actually it was all still there. And instead of kind of praying for people and putting my hands on them and having visions for them, I write poetry for people every week of my life. I write a poem for someone. For the last 10 years or something, I've done that. And every single one of those poems, if you couched it in Christian language, would be prophetic, would be that moment of that I feel like I become a vessel where God, something much larger than me, comes through me, and not just when I'm writing for other people, but all the time. Like, not all the time. Much creativity is bloody hard work, where you just sit there and don't feel anything and just force yourself to write, as we know. But so much that there's and maybe I get it more often than some, I don't know, but I have those moments either when I'm writing, creating myself, or when I'm performing, where it's those creative flow moments where everything else drops away and I feel like I'm just a vessel. I'm just a vessel for something larger than myself. I don't know if that explains your original question, but
I think it does, and more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you, I mean, because you've got so many different creative pursuits, like just list the top 5, like your favorite top creative pursuits. Because I feel like that list could be long. It could take up the rest of the interview time.
My favorite, my top 5. I mean, definitely my poetry. I love performance poetry and written poetry, and I'm obsessed with that still. Fiction writing has become really important for me, and so I have a number of junior fiction, middle grade fiction, picture books, YA fiction. So there's a number of things that I have. I have one of those that's being published. It's kind of the first one that's being published at the end of this year, start of next year, which is a junior fiction graphic novel called The Urban Legend Hunters, which I'm super excited about. So just like a spooky, funny action comedy for 7 to 12-year-olds. So I mean, definitely my most passionate things are fiction writing and poetry writing still, and I would actually, and poetry performance as something separate from that than just my writing. Those two things, though they're interwoven, they're different modes of creativity for me in some way. Yeah, definitely those two. And then I love drawing and painting, and I try to do a lot of that. So this is my my latest book, Even Lost Things Glow, which looks very bright in this light, but you can kind of see it is the illustration I got to do. So I love I kind of became obsessed with that over COVID. I think because I was homeschooling my children, and so I didn't have much time to sit and write stuff, but I always had the painting pad open next to me, and so would just dabble in that for a while and go back to teaching them and put a few more brush strokes on, and kind of taught after an initial lesson from a friend of mine, then taught myself creativity, taught myself painting and drawing, which I've just loved, absolutely loved. And then I love woodworking and wood carving as well, wood whittling things, just as kind of the hobby.
Wait, I think it's really cute how you're just skipping over this little artwork thing that you just picked up. Like, you have to show them these pieces because I saw them and I was like, no. Like, Joel, I know you're talented, but like, no, you can't stand on stages and do what you do and also do this. Like, it's not fair. We have to see them.
Oh, I don't know what I have here of mine. I don't even know. I can't even see. I've got that on my book.
They're so good.
Thank you. And the thing is, I like that for me. I was always a words person. So the visual art side of things, it wasn't me at all until actually it was until the tour when I was did the launch tour for my book Woven just before COVID. I was up in Queensland in Australia, and a friend of mine runs an art school, and I was just staying with her for the night. And she was like, "Oh, come along to my art school." I was like, "Oh, okay, sure, I'll just go along and do it." And I sat down and started working at this thing, going, "This is." I'm not an artist. And she comes over, she's like, no, let me give you a little something, and then you can go from there. And she put a black piece of paper and said, you're going to do the opposite instead of just trying to draw something. And you're going to do like white chalking on black paper to start with. And here's a picture that you can copy, and here's a few different things. And I'm like, oh, all right, but I don't know. I just don't know what I'm doing. Like, and she's like, don't try to draw this thing. Just look at the shading, look at the white and the grays, and just stop trying to draw the picture and just play and draw the color in the white and the shade, like just see what happens. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm doing it, and like half an hour in, I'm like, this is shit. Like this is bad. This is not looking like anything. And she comes over to me and she's like, she goes, that's great. I'm like, this is not great. And she goes, just here, let me pick it up and walk away 3 meters from you and show you. And she kind of showed me, and I was like, oh, that's a thing. Look at it. It's a thing. Look what I did. and so again, it again was one of those things, that those creative repressed things that I had, and this wasn't because of a teacher had said it to me, I had repressed it in myself, because of that. I think because of the when you're a kid and you draw, and then you're like, oh well, I compare it to kids who can draw really well instantly, you have that natural ability, you're like, no, I can't do that. So I just never did. And so then, as with anything, I'm a very obsessive person, if you haven't picked up on all the many things that I do. So I just became obsessed with it, and over COVID really went hard at it to the point where I ended up painting a watercolor series and was like, oh yeah, let's do an exhibition of this. So so within a year of picking up the paintbrush or the white charcoal, within a year of doing that, I then held my first exhibition. And so I brought the watercolors together with I wrote a poem for each of them based on the Enneagram. So it's kind of it was called Human and Exploration of the Inner World. And so I did I actually ended up doing 12. So I did the 9 Enneagram and 3 others, animals, watercolor kind of based animals, that I then also inked onto the back of skateboards, kind of did up skateboards and inked these animal characters on the back, and then worked with musicians around the world to bring together the poems, as I call them pongs, songs and poetry, pongs together, which is probably not the nicest, most poetic name for them. But so I put on this exhibition, this online exhibition, because it was during COVID, of my art and my poetry and music, and it all smushed together. You can still see it at joelmckerrow.com/human, or just go to joelmckerrow.com and you can still go through and see the exhibition if you want to see that stuff. But yeah, which was because then I had a lot of artistry friends, like you just said, Alyssa, going, this is too unfair. Like, I've been wanting to do an exhibition for years, and this is what I picked. This was kind of the learning from it. I was like, every time someone said that, it was always with a but. Like I really want, I've been painting for years and wanting to do an exhibition, but this happened, or but I just haven't got the but. And I realized, like, over that time, putting on the exhibition and having people respond, and it did really well, and thousands of people kind of online came to it, and I sold all the pieces. And is so much, it's not that I am more talented at all. I don't think I'm a talented artist. I just obsess over things, and it's that I work really, really hard and love what I'm doing, both in my writing and in my artistry, like in painting, creating on the iPad, digital iPad. So whatever it is, I work really hard at it and put my all into it. And then part of it I have to acknowledge is like my ego and my maybe even definitely my privilege as a white man in this world, to go, surely people want to see my stuff, surely people. And so part of it definitely would come out of that, but it's also the courage, like there's something in me that is like, no, I'm going to put this out there, and I'm going to get rid of the buts. And like, there's always going to be a but for whatever creative thing we're doing. And I think the journey into the illustrated stuff, it was my journey into, even with this thing that I didn't think I could do at all, I can still do, and anyone could still do. I think that's kind of what I'm saying, is whatever creative project that we have, whatever thing we're working on, we can all do it if we give ourselves to it and have the courage then to offer it out into the world. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's my favorite spot to ask questions in, because like for me, working with aspiring storytellers or gifted storytellers who are stuck, or or really exceptional visionaries and teachers who can't tell a story to save their lives at first, right? Like all the stories that they tell themselves about why they can't do something, or why no one will care about it if they do it, or why they couldn't possibly make any money doing something that they love that much.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because, when I think about artists, and we talked about this during our last conversation about, in the American culture, at least, like the arts are like, where are the arts? Where are the arts? They're certainly not being taught to little kids or enjoyed by them unless they have parents finding other resources outside of the school system. And there's like this, I'm married to a musician, so I got to hear about all of that in our early days, about how, not a lot of people make it. And if you do, then you got to sell out. Like all the cultural stories that are baked in around art and creativity that aren't even, those are just cultural stories. Those aren't even the individual ones of this teacher pointed at me when I was in 6th grade and made me feel an inch tall. Like, how do people even get this stuff out into the world with all of the layers, stories that are packed on top of it? So what are the ones that you see most often, or that you hear the most often from people? What comes after the but most often? I want to do this, but.
Yeah. Often it's I call it kind of either our legitimate excuses, because there's definitely legitimate excuses. And there's also the illegitimate excuses too. And so for some it will be, but I have 3 kids, I have 4 kids, I have kids, or I have this person that I have to take care of, or like just the reality of life. I have a mortgage that I have to pay and therefore have to work all these hours for, whatever it might be. Like there's legitimate excuses. But then even within that, like I can talk to people and say, well, and kind of in the mentoring that I do, when I hear that from people, often I will get them to have a think about their life and to kind of timetable schedule out their life. And within that, it's pretty easy to be able to go, so these like 15 hours of Netflix watching, what if just like 10 of those hours a week became just playing with creativity? And definitely not to say that we need to stop all watching of TV, etc., and especially when we have busy, crazy, chaotic lives, because I think it's not a bad thing to have downtime at all. But what if some of that downtime was creative playing downtime? And because what I realized, especially growing up, especially having my 2 kids, I still had moments where I would be writing, even if I was writing poetry whilst sitting on the toilet for the minute with them banging on the door, trying to get in or trying to get me out. I still had moments where I could create. And so I think like finding those creative moments, I think is really important. But the other cultural story that I think we often have is whatever cultural stories around, I think so much of it actually is fear. Like whatever our either legitimate or illegitimate excuses, so much of whatever the story on the surface is, it comes down to we make our excuses, or we shape our lives around a way that will allow us to cope with the fear. And I think fear sits in all the people that I've spoken to over many years. Fear sits at kind of the heart of what stops them in their creative journey and in their either in their own creative practice or then in the bringing it out into the world. The fear of, I mean, all of those fears of being rejected, of a lot of it comes down to that fears of, if I put myself out there into the world and I'm rejected, then what does that say about me, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think regardless of cultural stories or individual personal stories, fear seems to be the biggest thing. And so that means the way forward for most of us, I think, in our creative journeys and in our creative practices, in our creative careers, in just trying to bring our stuff out into the world, is actually to sit down with our fear and to have a conversation with it and stop running from it, and kind of talk to it about what is that fear? What's the fear that I am giving myself to, and having that conversation, which I have done at various times over the years. I've had that conversation with my fear. And for me, and have been forced to, as an Enneagram 3, if anyone knows the Enneagram, kind of the driven achiever, focused achiever, so much of my life and my, like, in all the things that I'm doing that we're talking about before, I tend to do a lot. The shadow side of that, because there's definitely, there's a few shadow sides of that, but the shadow side of that in terms of fear is, which is the 3's fear, is that if I'm not doing all these things and trying to change the world and trying to change people's lives, and if I'm not bringing work out into the world and creating and doing this, then what am I? Like, I'm not worthy. I'm not, I need to be doing and achieving to feel that sense of self-worth, just to get super vulnerable. And so I have had to sit with that fear and have that conversation many times, because that has also played out, because as we know, our greatest strengths, also where the greatest light shines, the biggest bloody shadows happen in the wake of that light. And that shadow at various times has almost fractured my relationships and my friendships, my marriage, my life. And so I think, and this is the thing, is when we choose to work on our creativity and on the things, like the fear that sits beneath our creative blocks, etc., we're not only getting better at our creativity, but actually we're getting better at ourselves. We're becoming who we're meant to be. And our creativity, actually, one of the things that gives us kind of this, it's this microcosm world that we get to work our shit out in, so that in the macro world of our relationships, etc., we're working it out there as well, by working it out in the micro creative world, by pushing past our fear, by having the conversation with our fear, by showing up to the page again and again and again, means that in my relationships now, I know the steps, I know the way forward to push past fear, to have the conversation with fear about my relationship, to show up again and again and again to the relationship. Like, I know all my stuff because I get to play it out in the playground of my creativity. And then that transposes into my life. I don't know where all that came from. I forget what we were talking about, but I'm just rambling about life and creativity.
Well, just about everybody here, everybody here has published a book before. And so
Mm.
we all, well, I don't know if everybody did, but we listened to the last podcast that you had in the Deep Place where it was talking about coming down the mountain. And
Yeah.
it was so funny because we listened to it. We had that conversation with you about, coming off of your big synchronicity filled experience into like everyday life with children, trying to sort things out. And then all kinds of things happened with some of the folks on here related to this. So I'm curious if anyone else has questions coming up or anything for Joel around this, because there's some big stuff happening in the background for some of you.
I'm not sure I have a question, but I've written a lot over the years, and I have 5 books ready to go and just couldn't publish. That I had all my excuses, but it boils down to fear, which is coming out now as I've stepped forward that I'm going to do this. But once I decided I was going to do it, I was really in a hurry. Like, let's just get this done. I just want to get this out here. I don't care how many I sell. It's like I have been holding this. I've got what's 5 quintuple, whatever it is, quintuplets in my gut, and I just got to get them out. Let's just get them out. And then I heard your podcast on coming down the mountain. And I sat in my room and just cried the way that you talked about the cup and how you could have the most delicious coffee, but if it's in a cup,
Styrofoam cup. Yeah.
It's bad presentation. It just doesn't taste as good. And you talked about the value of the cup. And it hit me so hard because I've just been wanting to get it out. Like, I gotta have all these babies. I can't take it anymore. I'm tired of being pregnant. And I realized, I just need to slow down and do this right. Even if don't have some big desire to be a bestseller or anything. It's for me, it's just like, just have these babies. Okay, let me get on with my life. And then I recalled, as I was listening to that, I recalled the first thing I ever heard you do was by the river. Oh gosh, don't cry, Teddy. And the power of it. And at the time that I listened to it, I said, this guy's got to have some kind of Holy Ghost background. I can feel it, but more than that, it was the like, you had the music, you had the singer, it was like, I've heard people give their spoken word before, but the whole picture of it was like, almost, is there an altar? Because I need to hit it. But I thought, like, this guy, he's done the whole thing. He didn't leave anything out. And so that's what I remembered as I was listening to that podcast. And it really inspired me. Like, if I believe that I have some books that are life-changing, life-worthy, that I need to do it right. I just need to do it right. And so I want to thank you for that, because it calmed me down. It just like, okay, whatever, time is not I just need to do it right. And I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for sharing. That's so lovely to hear. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Eddie.
That kind of reminded me, like, when we work with people, and when I just work with people, we've all written a book, like we said. Everyone pretty much has a struggle with visibility, right? Like, getting that thing out there. Maybe you're okay with the work itself, but like, it's actually stepping out and pushing that into the world and getting more eyeballs on it, like intentionally, right? You can kind of push it out, like, and half-ass it, you know, but I mean, like, really push it out and like really believe in what you wrote. Have you ever struggled with visibility, or like seen other people struggle? I'm sure you've seen other people struggle, but like personally, and what would you kind of advise people to, how they can face that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's one of our massive things is, how do we get eyeballs onto our things? How do we bring our work out into the world? And part of it is, I think, what Teddy was saying, that for me, I need to, as I come to the end of my creative output in terms of bringing together a project, I then kind of, and it doesn't come naturally for most of us, I think, but I then kind of need to put as much energy and focus into the bringing it out into the world as I did the creating it, bringing it out of my heart and onto the page, or onto the whatever it is, and to really to focus on what that looks like. For me, it's hard to, I think it's hard to do it as a writer, creative, and independent artist, or whatever you might be, in a fast way, because I just don't think it works. I think the long-term development of a tribe, like of for me, it's always been the way that most of my stuff gets out there. Like, the stuff that gets out there the most is the stuff that connects with my tribe, my crew, the people who I've built relationship with and served and written poetry for over the years, and the people who, in crass marketing terms, are your super fans. But really, they're the people who would miss you if you were gone, and would miss your creativity if you disappeared from the world. They're the people who will market you the most and get your stuff out there the most. And those people come, I think, not when we're trying to sell them stuff, but when we are, when we push past the fear in ourselves, as we were talking about before, and believe that what we have might change someone's life, and we give it to them as a gift. And so I write poetry for people. Once a week, I write a poem for someone and I give that to them. And that has done more for my creative career than probably anything I've done in my life, in terms of marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Because when someone gives you a poem and speaks to your heart about who you are in your life, like, it changes their lives. And then the outflow of that is, and you don't do it so that they become super fans, but the outflow of that is that they will inevitably they'll be stoked about everything that you're bringing out into the world, and be like, go and get this book, like, from, or whatever it might be. So I think the more that you can take those people who are in your life, or you slightly, and just bless them, and go over and above to bless them and speak into their lives. Like, I did a conference end of last year, a retreat, and I was just there to do poetry, to share poetry. There was about 30 people there. And I got up at the start of the retreat and I said, look, one of the things I love doing is writing poetry for people. And I want to write a poem for every single one of you here over this next 4 days. So not only was I not getting paid for that, like, it was hard work. It was, I think I listened to I did 25 different kind of 20-minute sessions over those 4 days, as well as everything, like all the speaking and performing and stuff on top of that. I worked myself to the bone. I went as hard as I could. And then those 25 people, over a whole lot of them, maybe like 15 of them, I got to share the poem with there at the retreat. And then over the kind of month or two afterwards, I got to share the rest of them. But those 25 people, like, it's going over and above to bless people and give to them, not to try to sell them my stuff, but they're the people who then who have like signed up for courses, and people who have, for my courses, people who have bought my merchandise, people who have my stuff that's going out into the world is going to those. So the more you can do that, the more you can, not to get money off people, not to constantly be saying, not to kind of jump up and say, here's my product, but to have a whole tribe that when you have a product to bring out into this world, you can be like, hey guys, I've got this thing, and they go nuts with it and they love it. So I think doing that, and probably the other thing on that, I think for me, definitely the thing that's got my things most out there as well as being collaboration too, like collaborating with musicians, with other writers, with other artists, with publishers and agents. And like, if you can have other people who get on board with your vision, and have a market of their own, then it just multiplies what you're doing. So collaboration is one of my favorite things for that as well.
Awesome, thank you. And probably also keeps you accountable, huh? To staying visible.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I was so surprised when Amanda asked you about what the most common buts are that you didn't say imposter syndrome. And maybe that's because it's just glaring in my mind with flashing red lights right now with my projects. But I legitimately repeat, and I think it was so funny in that podcast when you said you just kind of off the rails said, if you don't feel like an imposter, you're not doing it right. And then you paused and you're like, wait, let me think about that before. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. You had to like, and it has been such a thing for me. I've just constantly reminded myself, like, no, it's okay. It's exactly how you're supposed to feel. Keep going.
Yeah. Yes, imposter syndrome is definitely one of those big buts that I should have mentioned. Why did that song come into my head? I like big butts. I don't even know, but because we don't like the big butts, especially imposter syndrome. But I do think that with imposter syndrome, so much of the fear that comes around that, imposter syndrome plays out in the lives of so many artists who don't feel like they are worthy to be stepping into what they're stepping into. Like Alyssa releasing your book, whenever the book gets released, for you stepping into that, it means that you're owning this part of yourself and declaring it to the world. And maybe that's where so much of the fear is. It's not only owning our identity, but it's actually a declaration of our identity. It's you saying, I am a writer, world, and I am inviting you into the experience of my life. And it's incredibly vulnerable to do that. And hence why so much of that Coming Down the Mountain podcast episode, there's the raw, we feel super raw once we bring something out into the world, and super naked, and like, everyone's seeing my stuff. But just as you said, Alyssa, and I do agree with myself still, that I think when we feel like an imposter is because we are imposing on new ground that we haven't been on before, and that's being a pioneer. That's what artistry is all about. And so that's why I would say we should feel like imposters, because we should be on new ground all the time, in a new environment, playing with new things. And I'm constantly, as you have heard, I'm constantly doing new creative projects and new creative things, and delving into whole new creative areas. And every time I do, I feel like an imposter. I feel like, what am I doing? How am I making? I know nothing about music, yet I have 5 poetry music albums. I literally know nothing about it, and that is because of the collaboration. That's because I bring amazing musicians around me. But in all the other, like I was saying at the start, it was only about 5 years ago that I did my first, that I was performing, like acting, narrative dialogue acting was the first time, like 5 years ago, when I wrote a theatre show with one of Australia's best actors. She's in amazing amazing Australian TV shows, Anna McGahn, a dear friend of mine, but she's incredible. And she's been writing stage shows for years, theatre shows, and acting at the top of Australia's. And then I offered to write this show with her and be the main actor in this show. And I haven't acted ever in my life since I was like 12 years old. The imposter syndrome on that was huge. I thought I was an absolute failure, but all it took was her coming alongside me and going, Joel, you know, like, I've worked with actors for years and you are great, and you're doing so wonderful. And maybe this comes back to the collaboration as well. And the way we push past our imposter syndrome is to recognize where that fear is coming from for us. To recognize actually being an imposter is really good, and to have someone say, Alyssa, you're freaking amazing. Bring the bloody book out into the world and be proud of it and your writing and who you are, and declare it and own it, just to put you on the spot, Alyssa.
Yeah, no, actually, as you were saying all that, I was realizing just how many layers there are to the identity sort of unraveling with doing this, right? Or with any creative project, because you have the like declaration of I'm a writer, or I'm a singer, or this is me taking a step to say I am that thing. But then you have the details of the like really intimate creative project that you're sharing with the world. Mm-hmm. So mine is all about grief, and I'm sharing this experience of healing through my grief. And I'm coming out and sharing that with the world. But guess what? I still have days where I am like crippled by a wave of grief that washes over me. And I look at that project and I'm like, what the am I doing? Like, who am I to put this thing out there that talks about healing through grief when I can't get out of bed today because I'm so swollen with it, you know? And so like, that's just my story.
Me hearing that makes me say that you're the exact person that needs to bring that out into the world, because healing from grief is not the instant. And anyone who said not instant, or not even a thing, like not even it's it's healing from grief, but it's the continual healing. And so you recognize you're still in the midst of it and on that journey is the very reason why people need to hear the words that use that as your like I'm crippled in bed, in fear, in grief today, and that means that my words are true. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think that that's something that we are kind of as artists shifting into this new paradigm of just being that open and that real and messy and fluid with it all the time, you know. And I feel like we're getting out of this sort of era of self-help people who have made it through and are now preaching how to do it yourself, because I feel a lot of us in our industry are kind of suffocated by that. And so it's really difficult to fight that cultural norm of I don't have to have it all figured out. I can still be a splattered mess all over the place and be just as valuable.
Yeah. And I remember when that kid at the start of my creative life came up and said, I heard you speak to me and I just don't feel so lonely. I remember thinking at the time, and there's no way I would have articulated it like this at the time, but I remember kind of what came out of that for me is I realized at that moment that what I have to say is more important than the fear that stops me from saying it. And that just that simple statement has been one of those catch cries for me, one of those mantras for me throughout all of my life when I hit these moments of fear or imposter syndrome or whatever it might be, that to remind myself what I have to say, these words I have to say, these stories I have to bring out is more important than the fear that stops me from sharing it. And so I'm going to choose to bring it out into the world, even in the midst of that fear. Yeah.
That's so funny. I used to whisper a very similar thing before I would get on stage and perform a slam poem. I would just say, it's not about you. Like, get out of the way. It's not about you. It's about what you're saying. And it was this like, it actually doesn't matter at all if I screw this whole thing up, because it wasn't about me in the first place.
Yeah. And it allows you to then be that statement, and that knowing then allows you to be that vessel to get out of the way and just be the flow through of something.
Yeah, those are some big butts. You're right. I feel
Right.
like we have an intro song for this episode.
We don't like big butts.
So I'm curious. I know one of the fears that I hear about a lot, because people are always concerned about how their words are going to land, because inevitably we've said something in the past and we've been shut down or criticized or something devastating. And so that piece around the criticism, around the critics, how do you deal with that?
Around the external critics or the internal critics?
Oh, the external critics.
So for me, because I deal with this a lot because I am mentoring and sharing with people who are in kind of spoken word and slam poetry and getting up on stages and sharing, and often the question comes up, when should I be sharing this poem? When should I be on stage sharing it? And what I say is, in relation to critics, is kind of, if you, the poetry we should share is the poetry that if we get up and we bare our all to an audience, and there is a bunch of critics in the audience who tear it apart, who are like, they didn't hit that and they didn't do that and their performance was off there and this and this, that we would be still stand on the solid ground of our identity, that we would be able to, even in the midst of that, and that wouldn't shatter our lives and the story that we have just shared, but we can still hold on to that poem, in this sense of sharing that poem. That when people are saying that people should perform their poetry, bring it out into the world, onto the stage, when they know that even if it's torn apart, they will still be okay. And I think part of that, there's a number of things to that, to take that from that micro moment of performance poetry, slam poetry on the stage, to all of our creativity. We're always going to have external critics. And no matter what we do, there are going to be people who, even if we do the most amazing stuff in the world, there is going to be people who tear us apart because of their own stuff. Because that's how they've been brought up, because that's how they see the world, etc., because they're bitter, cynical people who want to get revenge on everyone because of the fear, because they've got a whole lot of fear in their life. And so when the external critics come, to be able to bring our works out into the world that we have done the work on, like the true heart work on, to go, no, I know that even if this bombs, I have gone on the journey of this creative process, of this creative project that I'm doing. I've written this book with all of me, and this book has healed me in the writing of it. Therefore, regardless of anyone else's response, regardless of what the critics say, this has been a success. Like, I think it kind of comes down to a refashioning, a challenging of our ideas of success, in the midst that perhaps success is much more about the change that our creativity brings into us. And then if it changes other people's lives, is the cherry on top, is the wonderful bonus extra. But to allow our creativity to change us, and then as we bring it out into the world, the paradox then is almost separating it from our identity, so that it's not our identity, to be able to say, people can tear this story of mine apart, but they're not tearing me apart. And people can rip apart this book that I'm bringing out into the world. The critics of my life will tear this apart, but it's not me. I have the firm foundation of my relationship with myself, which is filled with grace and self-forgiving and self-holding. And therefore, no matter if I can hold this project at arm's length. It's like we birth it. It's like we birth it, like Teddy was saying, in the midst of us, like babies that we've been holding inside us for months or perhaps years and years and years. But then when we bring them out into the world, kind of similar to what we do with with real human life babies, we got to let them go. Like we actually have to not grip them with gripped hands, but bringing a book out into the world is actually an act of letting it go. And so however people take it, whatever their response, both the amazing responses and the negative critic responses, we still are standing on that firm foundation. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's one of the things when I hear someone say, well, but my book is an extension of me, I go, not ready yet.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not like closed up. Whatever that process was isn't complete yet, because it does have to be separate, or else all they're doing is putting themselves out into the world to be criticized, rather than this is something I brought in, and and that the creative process. I think I channeled the blog several years ago. It was like 3 a.m, and I had this idea that writing is like parenting, and you have this idea come through you, and then you have to develop a relationship with it, and you can organize the hell out of it and then try to keep it in line like an authoritative parent. This is where you're going. This is the start. This is the finish. There's no moving off of this path. We all know how those kids end up. I have been one of those kids. And then, and then there's I forget what I call them, but what they call them, like free range parenting today, right? Like you just let the kid make all the decisions because they have all the wisdom. And then you have content that has dragged you all over the place and you don't even recognize it anymore, right? Because it's just one rabbit hole after another. And so it was like this idea that like we can give something structure, but then it has a life of its own. And I think that there's something about having, what I'm hearing you say is like, there's something about keeping that perspective that you're interacting with something that is coming through you. It's not you. It's maybe a part of you. Maybe it's, something that you're sorting out for a time that feels a lot like you. It looks like you, it kind of sounds like you because it's been hanging out with you for so long. But we all know as parents, at the end of the day, that kid comes in with its own like set of characteristics, personality traits, qualities that is unique to them. So I love that idea of thinking about it in terms of, is it fully out yet? Is it ready to, think in terms of a kid?
And this not to say, because what I don't want people to hear in us saying this as well is not to then make this the excuse for why you don't bring your thing out into the world, because that's where people can go as well. Like, well, that's another good excuse I can use, and not that we would consciously say that, but we take that on of like, well, no, I'm not ready yet, and it's definitely we need to wrestle with that and go and work through that. But you don't work through that by sitting back saying I'm not ready yet. You actually work through that by bringing it maybe not necessarily out into the world, but to the person that you trust. And this is where the collaborator, and this is where the people thing, the tribe thing comes in, is those inner circle people who are able to say, who we are able to say, this is my thing. I want to bring it out into the world, but I want to show you first. And I want you to speak into it. And tell me what needs to be changed, and maybe some of them will do the editing, like a more the editing kind of thing, and others will just be the cheerleaders who are like, yes, go for it, or others will be more the pastoral. Do you feel like you're actually ready for this? Like if someone shuts this story down, are you going to be all right, or are we going to have to pull you out of, I don't know, drunk out of Vegas at 4 a.m. in the morning the next morning? I don't know why I thought of it. Maybe I'm talking to Americans, so I'm using it. But I just assume that lots of people just end up drunk at 4 a.m. at Vegas because their life has fallen apart and they have nowhere else to turn. That's just an assumption. It might be wrong. But we need, so that's, yeah, don't use this as an excuse to sit back and not bring this out into the world. Actually use it as it gives us the path forward to bring something out into the world, to say, actually, well, the path forward is take the step. The first step is this baby of mine that's had a lonely childhood, which someone, I forget who it was, someone said, our creative projects should have lonely childhoods. And I really liked that, like that we don't show them out to the world while they're still our babies. But then as they're growing up, this person, this inner circle, this person that I trust, bring it out. And then that is the next step to then bringing it further out into the world.
Yeah. Yep. Safe steps. I have seen what happens when people say yes to too much, and then it acts like a rubber band,
Yeah.
Definitely.
If I could add one thing, I appreciate, Joel, you're sharing your story of being in class and your face turning red, and because mine does that too.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Good genetics.
It's just like a tomato. But I know I have a memory of probably maybe junior high school, somewhere in there, and this is absolutely dating me, where back then you could call into the radio station and be on hold, and you might get picked by the radio, the DJ, to like say something, right? Do you have like something you want to say to your friend, or just these kind of things? And I would call all the time, and you just almost never got picked because everyone else was calling, and I got picked one time and I totally froze. They said, "So what would you like to say?" And I just said like a couple words. I don't even remember. I literally don't even remember what I said, but they laughed. Yeah. And one of the DJ said, "Oh, that was a wealth of creativity." And I remember what you were talking about, just this, I am done.
Yeah.
And again, back then I'm young. I was so embarrassed, but it was more like, I messed this up. How did I not come up with something to say? Became very internalized, like I did something wrong and bad. And that had such a lasting effect on even like if I got called on class, like spontaneously in class, just this instant, like, what if I lose my words and then they're going to mock me and it's going to turn into this thing. Yeah. And then how it became pervasive. So I became that in a lot of ways. And, fast forward all these years, I had taken a contract job to do some public education for the Navy here in San Diego. I didn't realize when they said, some public speaking, that it would be like auditoriums full of people. Right. And so, and by the way, I'm a 2-wing 1. So I'm a helper and I try and do it perfectly. Right. So my notes and my little slide deck, and, rehearsed it. And I had all the things in order, and I had, like 2 topics I talked on. Well, of course, the day I go into like the big, like the high level people that are required every few years to have this one thing, I forgot my notes, everything. And I literally am like, okay, it is now or never. I either have to pretend I'm sick and leave, or I just have to like trust that like words will come. And it went well. And, everyone's like, that was great, blah, blah, blah. And it was this pivotal moment where in my brain, I knew what I had to say, and I knew all the words, but it was like, I couldn't quite believe that when push came to shove, it would be true. And so it had this, like a faith moment, right? And it's so funny because, prior to that, and this is probably a 20-year gap between this thing with the radio and this thing, down here. But that identity had become mine, and it had been reinforced by those around me, just inadvertently, like, the first time I told my parents, you know, that I like did this public speaking, they're like, no, you didn't. It's not who you are, right? Like, so to, you know, to be able to have come into some of that, not that I'm always comfortable with it, but I have a faith in it. That even if I stumble, like you were saying, Alyssa, right? Even if I get out there and I kind of flub it a bit or whatever, like I'll get in there, I'll get my groove, I'll get whatever needs to be said will be said. And this is for who I'm speaking to. This isn't for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those things have all ended up being true in my story as well.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how those moments become not even just like a little part of us, like the smallest thing, that radio jockey he was probably just a little, like he's probably a 20-year-old who whatever, like, or but someone was having a bad day or whatever and just said the flippant offhand, and it becomes like this thing we shape our whole lives around.
Yes.
Becomes our very identity. And then it takes this massive moment of bravery often to see that wall fall. So I loved that you stepped into that. Is a beautiful moment for you, and how I wish that it could have happened earlier, how I wish it could have happened a year or two after you rather than 20 years later. How much of our, like, I look back at all those years that I spent, that I could have been really focused on my career, and part of me recognize again that it's ego, like imagine what I could be doing now if I hadn't spent all those years. But at the heart of it, it's coming to that point. I just love that image, you standing on stage and going, just making that intentional choice. And maybe that's where it is, even if it's just it's the intentional choice, isn't it? Like I am choosing to go against the grain of everything my identity seems to be, right, has been for 20 years. And it all begins with the intentional choice to do so. Like one small decision begins to unravel the 20 years of negative self-talk that you had done.
Yeah. And well, and just like what you're saying, Alyssa, right? You would say this little mantra to yourself right before going on stage, right? This isn't about me. And it would somehow click you into that. And I also remember afterwards, like, I got a good job and, you know, whatever people said, but there was this like, like that wasn't that bad. But 20 years.
Yeah.
I had to get there, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's one of the things I often talk about when I go, so I do a lot of school stuff. I go into maybe 30 schools a year teaching poetry and performance poetry and stuff. And one of the things I always say to students is you can either shape your life around the thing that keeps on coming to you, that makes you small, that has been forced upon you by other people, or that you've chosen to latch onto. You can shape your life around that, or you can realize that perhaps there's something else to shape your life around. What if you shaped your life around not the thing that makes you small, but the thing that you love, that other people are trying to push down often because it's different, because it's strange, because it's weird. But what if you shape your life around that I think we said at the start, that thing that makes you weird, that things that makes you strange? What would your life become then, rather than living small and then living in the regret of not giving yourself to that larger thing? And it's beautiful to see people when they choose to, no matter when that happens in our lives for us. Yeah.
Okay, so I have, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lori.
No, go ahead.
No, on that note, I just had a question because, and I know it's a total off the wall question, but I'm so curious if you ever had an answer growing up to everyone who asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up. I'm so curious how that landed on you, how you responded to it, and like at what point in your life did you, because your career is so unique, and the career that you've like built around creativity is so unique. And I'm sure so much of it was intentional, and I'm sure some of it just kind of happened by some divine synchronicity. So I'm curious about that.
I'm trying to remember what I would have answered. Definitely not an internationally touring performance poet. Would not have been in my radar at all in the slightest. I think probably to my Christian friends, I would have been like, I want to be a pastor, I want to be a preacher, I want to be up on the stage preaching during those years of my life. And probably at some point it was like, oh, I want to do something that helps people, youth work, psychology, that kind of thing. So it was in the helping, areas, vocational areas. I studied psychology when I first left uni. I did a psychology degree, somewhat more for the appeasement of my father than for my own whatever. But that's a whole other 2 hours of a podcast to talk about my dad.
I know. I was like, this is either going to be a real quick answer or it's going to lead into another conversation.
Yeah, a whole new podcast.
So let's skip the parents and let's go back to the kids. I love the fact that you're in the schools and that you're giving these kids these tools, this ability to see a different perspective. Perspective has been my word for this year, and I'm seeing it crop up everywhere. And so I love that you are giving them that different perspective. And I have to tell you that, Amanda sent the link to your podcast. I didn't even look at the title of it. I'm like, I saw Joel. I love Joel. He's an amazing guy. It's got to be awesome. And I click play and I'm listening to it. And you're talking about coming down that mountain. And I'm thinking, I love hiking. This is my guy. And I live in Colorado. We hike, I love hiking 14ers. And I just did, Long's Peak last year. And what an incredible experience. And you talked about coming down that mountain and how do you share that with other people. And I loved how you put it into perspective that we are the vessel and that it just can flow through us, that we've been given this unique opportunity to have this experience. And then it's almost our responsibility to take that experience and to share that with others. And how do we do that? And I love the fact, looking back to the kids again, that they have those tools, because until I met Amanda, I don't think I had any of those tools. Yeah. And so I turned 60 this year, and I met Amanda 13 years ago. That's a long time to go without any tools, so I love that. I can take those experiences and I can be that vessel. Yeah. And I'm in the middle of writing a children's book, and to share that. And it just, I don't know, you just blew my mind with that whole thought process. I don't have to worry about whether people like this. I can just let it be and share it. And so thank you so much for that perspective. I do have to say, when you said it was about marketing, I was like, oh my gosh. Amanda has tricked me again. She pushes me to the very edge all the time, and she has now tricked me again.
What's funny though, Amanda had the same reaction. Oh man, he's going to talk about marketing.
And I knew, and that's why I mentioned it in the podcast, is I knew people would have that reaction. Like, as soon as you bring up some of these words, because they've been because they've been, I don't even know what the word is. They've been so talked about in a certain way for so long that you immediately think of, people just pushing their stuff on you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But a healthy form of marketing is incredibly important for us, isn't it? Which is so much of what we've talked about today as well. But the school's work that I do, Laurie, it would easily be, like, I love it as much as I love the performing and the creative stuff that I do, like the coming alongside young people and seeing them have these these moments of life change, not just kind of giving them extra skills for poetry, but you see a kid who you get to work with over a week at a school go from the shy kid who won't say anything and never says anything in class to standing up, declaring their slam poem at the end of the week to their friends, to a totally silent audience, and the teachers coming up afterwards saying, that kid has not written once in class this year and had definitely not stood up in front of the class ever, and yet look at them now. Like that for me, yeah, is one of the most beautiful things I get to do in my life. Is really, really wonderful. I love it.
I work a lot with teenagers, and I love those light bulb moments that where you can just see where it clicks, whether they're 3 and 4, or 14, 15, 16, or 40. It doesn't matter. But to watch people have those light bulb moments where something finally clicks. But I just love that you work with the kids and that you get to have those moments with them and to see that and to experience and give them that different perspective. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, no worries at all. My pleasure.
So fun. I'm so sad that we have to end the conversation, but I know that, you probably have other things to do. It's early in the morning. You probably have kids waiting for you.
Go feed my kids breakfast. It's school holidays over here, so I'm on as well as doing all the things we've been talking about. I'm parent to children, and so I'm on full-time parenting for this 2 weeks of school holidays, which is glorious.
It's like a little bit of disruption that you need to keep the creativity flowing, right?
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So
but they teach me a lot. They teach me a lot about creativity. My kids do, that's for certain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's next for you? What should our audience be looking forward to?
There's a bunch of, so what's just happened for me has been like, I've just released that book, the Even Lost Things Glow, Poetry for the Misplaced. If you want to grab a hold of that, you can do through joelmckerrow.com. And I released as well, I just released an album called Flow, an improvised poetic meditation. So it's which I got to do with the cellist, where I met a bunch of you in Nashville with Chelsea McGow, who played cello with me on stage there. We ended up doing an album together, which is totally improvised. So it's improvised poetic meditation. So people, you can go and listen to that on the Spotify's, etc. What's coming up? I'm working on. So I've got this book, The Urban Legend Hunters, being released, which I've kind of just finishing final edits with my publisher on. That'll be coming out in Australia end of this year, start of next year. The illustrator's just beginning to work on it. And as part of that, I just finished the first draft of the second book of that, Urban Legend Hunters 2. And I'm halfway. I have a lot of things. Let's be honest. I have a lot of things coming out. I have, and
just read the bio again. But sum it up.
I just recorded the demo tracks for a new album with my friend Rochelle. So I'll have a new album coming out at some point this year. And other books that I'm pitching to publishers, like fiction books, middle grade fiction that I'm doing. My podcast is just about to finish the 3rd season, the Deep Place podcast. If you haven't listened to the Deep Place podcast, jump on and have a listen. If you're going to do that, probably listen from like the start of this 3rd season, or listen to the other things in it as well. But this 3rd season is one kind of narrative arc that follows through. There's a lot of things. joelmckerrow.com, sign up for my newsletter and you'll find out what they are as they happen. Yeah.
Are those newsletters like CVS receipt? Oh, you might not have CVS's there, but you go to the store and they give you that long receipt that just keeps going. I don't know if you have that. Yeah. Is that what your newsletters are like?
No, not quite.
Oh, okay.
I also do, for those who are interested in the writing side of things, I won't say too much about this, but I run an online school called the School for Creative Development, which you can get to see through my website, joelmckerrow.com as well, which kind of takes a bunch of the stuff we've been talking about today and kind of hits the ground running, where the rubber hits the road, in terms of how do we take our creativity, and a bunch of them go from like the blank page of inspiration all the way through to bringing it out into the world. And then there's modules on the creative journey, modules on creative career and vocation, modules on just specifically the art of storytelling. There's a whole lot of stuff there, so you can have a look at that on my website too.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me. This has been so good.
Yeah, loved having you. And I'm looking forward to all the fun ways that we'll get to play together. I think there's some opportunities for us to help creatives and youth. Like every time we talk about the youth, I'm like, yeah, let's do that together. So more on that later. But thanks for being here today. And thank you for all the ways that you've already touched all of our lives. And looking forward to seeing all of the many things that are going to be coming into our inboxes and being able to be shared with the people that we know who need to be inspired. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
And thanks so much for listening to this episode of Sips of Story and Sanity. If you like what you heard, tell us about it. Leave a comment. Go check out Joel over at joelmckerrow.com, and we'll see you next time.